evening, I'm Alma Angeles. Welcome to Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to speak with his U.S. and French counterparts on Saturday after the U.S. warned that Moscow could invade Ukraine in days. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said an occupation of the capital, Ottawa, and trucker-led blockades of vital trade links to the U.S. over COVID rules must end. New York City was poised to sack roughly 3,000 municipal workers on Friday for failing to meet a deadline to get vaccinated against COVID-19. And Starbright, the James Webb Space Telescope has seen its first star, though it wasn't quite tonight, and even taken a selfie. First in our news, the United States said it is now sending 3,000 more troops to Poland to reassure NATO allies amid heightened fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, these 3,000 troops from the 82nd Airborne Division, the U.S. military's main rapid reaction force, were already placed on alert in late January at the request of President Joe Biden. Biden wanted to show support for U.S. allies in Eastern Europe in the face of any possible aggression by Russia. A senior defense official said they will now leave the base in coming days and are expected to arrive in Poland early next week. Now, these troops will join some 2,000 airborne soldiers whose deployment was announced on February 2. A total of 1,700 are in Poland and the rest in Germany, where U.S. forces in Europe have their headquarters. In a dramatic escalation of its threat warning, the White House said that Russia could invade Ukraine in a matter of days, even before the end of the Beijing Olympics on February 20. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stopped short of saying the U.S. now believes President Putin has actually made the decision to attack. Still, the White House's tone and language on the possibility of war in Europe were much more pointed and strident than just days ago. Take a look.
We continue to see signs of Russian escalation, including new forces arriving at the Ukrainian border. As we've said before, we are in the window when an invasion could begin at any time, should Vladimir Putin decide to order it. If a Russian attack on Ukraine proceeds, it is likely to begin with aerial bombing and missile attacks that could obviously kill civilians without regard to their nationality. A subsequent ground invasion would involve the onslaught of a massive force. With virtually no notice, communications to arrange a departure could be severed and commercial transit halted. No one would be able to count on air or rail or road departures once military action got underway. We are not saying that a decision has been taken, a final decision has been taken by President Putin. What we are saying is that we have a sufficient level of concern based on what we are seeing on the ground and what our intelligence analysts have picked up, that we are sending this clear message. And it remains a message that we have now been sending for some time. And it is, yes, it is an urgent message because we are in an urgent situation. We want to be crystal clear on this point. Any American in Ukraine should leave as soon as possible, and in any event, in the next 24 to 48 hours. We obviously cannot predict the future. We don't know exactly what is going to happen. But the risk is now high enough, and the threat is now immediate enough, that this is what prudence demands. If you stay, you are assuming risk with no guarantee that there will be any other opportunity to leave, and no prospect of a U.S. military evacuation in the event of a Russian invasion.
Meanwhile, the Pentagon said top U.S. General Mark Milley spoke by telephone on Friday with his Russian counterpart, General Valery Gerasimov. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Gerasimov, chief of the Russian General Staff, discussed several security-related issues on concern, according to Colonel Dave Butler, the Joint Staff spokesman. The telephone call is not the first between the two generals, but their conversations are rare. Now, images, as you can see here, published by the Russian Defense Ministry, show tank drills and paratrooper landings during joint Russian-Belarusian military drills. And the drills come at a time of heightened military tension as the West fears of an invasion of Ukraine with tens of thousands of Russian troops deployed on the Ukrainian border. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg warned on Friday of the real risk of a new armed conflict in Europe, as both the alliance and Russia are increasing their troop presence around Ukraine. And just now, Germany became the latest European country to advise its citizens to leave Ukraine, while the U.S. Embassy in Kiev ordered non-emergency staff to leave Ukraine as well. The prospect of frightened Westerners fleeing their country prompted Ukraine Foreign Ministry to issue an appeal to its citizens to keep calm. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, as earlier said, warned again of the real risk of a new armed conflict in Europe and a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. Now, this was during a visit to a key Romanian military base for the alliance. Take a look.
Risk for a full-fledged invasion, but there's also a risk for other types of aggressive actions, including attempts to topple the government in Kiev, hybrid cyber attacks, and many other types of Russian aggression.
As we speak, 1,000 additional U.S. troops from a Striker squadron are deploying to this base, bringing the total number of U.S. service members here to almost 2,000. This is really NATO in action.
However, in an interview with TASS on Thursday, Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko said that no matter what Russia says, NATO countries will not believe that it has no aggressive intentions. The situation has become completely absurd, he complained. We have repeatedly stated at various levels that we have no plans to invade or attack Ukraine. However, the West and the Ukrainians, too, are reluctant to hear what we say. Clearly, establishing peace in Ukraine is not part of NATO's plans. He also claimed that everything the West was doing involving Ukraine was aimed only at ensuring the so-called containment of Russia and undermining the defense capabilities and economic development of Russia. And as you can see here, Russia's Navy on Saturday launched large-scale exercises in the Black Sea, even as Moscow dismissed as hysteria a U.S. warning that a Russian attack on Ukraine could begin within days. The Russian Defense Ministry said the aim of this exercise is to defend the coast of the Crimean Peninsula, the bases of the forces of the Black Sea Fleet, as well as the country's economic sector from possible military threats. Tensions have been running high in the Black Sea in recent years, with Moscow accusing Ukraine's pro-Western government and Western powers of threatening its security in the waters of Crimea. In June last year, Russian forces fired warning shots at a British destroyer that it accused of entering its waters, claims denied by Britain. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to speak with his U.S. and French counterparts on Saturday after the U.S. warned that Moscow could invade Ukraine in days. Let's listen in.
I would expect that President Biden will engage by telephone with President Putin, but I don't have anything to announce for you on that right now.
Now, the United States has claimed since late October that Russia is preparing to attack Ukraine, but Moscow describes the allegations as fake news. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also said he will also speak to his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, the same day, terming this as a pivotal moment in the crisis. Take a look.
Underscore this unity and resolve when I speak with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov a little bit later this evening. I'll also make clear, as I have consistently, that if Russia is genuinely interested in resolving this crisis of its own making through diplomacy and dialogue, we're prepared to do that. In fact, that's our preferred path. It's the right and responsible thing to do. But it must take place in the context of de-escalation. So far, we've only seen escalation from Moscow. This is a pivotal moment. We're prepared for whatever should happen.
Meanwhile, here are more images published by the Russian Defense Ministry showing a Russian-Belarusian joint military exercise at the Osopovichisky training ground in Belarus, in which multiple rocket launchers fire salvos. The maneuvers come at a time of heightened military tension as the West fears an invasion of Ukraine, with tens of thousands of Russian troops deployed on the Ukrainian border. Tensions between Russia and the West have reached levels not seen since the end of the Cold War. But you wouldn't know it from Kiev, where people are going about their daily lives. In another development, the Philippine embassy in Warsaw, Poland, is in touch with the Filipino community in Ukraine in coordination with the Honorary Consulate General in Kiev amid the heightened tensions and the U.S. warning about a possible Russian invasion. DFA Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public and Cultural Diplomacy, Gunnar Musor, said approximately 380 Filipino nationals are living in Ukraine. Most are in Kiev and its environs and are therefore located from the eastern border near Russia, he said in a statement today. Musor said they are encouraged to contact the embassy, report any untoward incident they might observe in their respective areas, and to continue monitoring their Filipino friends through social media. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba, sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Siya ba yun? Tatay niya yun, di ba?
Oo, yung pila, yung gantong maglakad.
Tapos sisigaw, taho! Taho!
Taho! Ikaw nga.
Taho!
Kuya, matagal pa ba yan?
Pasensya na ho. Ito po, malapit na.
Ano ba yan? Ang bagal.
Tara pre, takbo!
Well, nanakaw! Ginagawa ko naman ng lahat eh. Bakit gano'n? Parang lalong tayong papahirap ng papahirap.
Gabi na po ah. Bakit taho pa po ang binibenta nyo?
ibang trivia, okay lang yan. Basta mabilis naman ang kamay mo sa pindutan, ayos na yan. Kaya papasukan na natin ang ating mga masisipag na delivery riders! Sa Georgia, USA, ipinagbabawal na kainin ito gamit ang tinidor at itinuturing na illegal. Agad-agad. Kasi kung mabilis ka siya, sasagot, no? Mabilis siya. Ikaw, sasagot. Maikli lang.
Wala na lang.
Para sa inyong lahat, ang programa, Tara Game! Agad!
We're still following the developments out of Ukraine. A number of EU countries have now urged their nationals to leave the country. Now, Moscow has poured scorn on the U.S. warnings of an invasion. Take a look. The White House's hysteria is more revealing than ever. The Anglo-Saxons need a war at all costs. The provocations, disinformation, and the threats are their favorite method for resolving their own problems. That, according to Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, and writing this on Telegram. Meanwhile, Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Antonov, told Newsweek magazine that the U.S. warnings were alarmist and repeated that his country was not going to attack anyone. Russia has denied any such plans while making a series of demands of the West, including a ban on Ukraine joining the Western Defense Alliance, NATO. In the midst of the furor, Russia last month announced a series of naval exercises in the Atlantic Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Mediterranean Sea, as well as in the waters and seas adjacent to Russian territory. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said an occupation of the capital, Ottawa, and trucker-led blockades of vital trade links to the U.S. over COVID rules must end. Let's listen in.
Everything is on the table because this unlawful activity has to end, and it will end. Of course, I can't say too much more now as to exactly when or how this ends because, unfortunately, we are concerned about violence. So we're taking every precaution to keep people safe. But the absolute safest way for this to end is for everyone to return to your communities now. I want to make something very clear. The illegal blockades seeking to take our neighborhoods and our economy hostage and the collective COVID fatigue we are facing are two very separate things. If you joined the protests because you're tired of COVID, you now need to understand that you are breaking laws. The consequences are becoming more and more severe. Canada's banks are governed by laws, regulations, and practices that ensure funds cannot be used for criminal or illegal activity, and these blockades are illegal. Canadian banks are monitoring financial activity very closely and taking action as necessary.
The Suspension Bridge is a key trade corridor used daily by more than 40,000 commuters and tourists and trucks carrying $323 million worth of goods on average. A Canada-US border crossing in the province of Alberta has also been blocked, and a third in Manitoba was shut down on Thursday. Truckers have been paralyzing the Canadian capital, Ottawa, for 2 weeks in opposition to COVID health rules. U.S. President Joe Biden told Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau on Friday he was concerned about the impact trucker-led blockades over COVID rules were having on vital trade links to the U.S.
We talked about the U.S.-based flooding of the 911 phone lines in Ottawa, the presence of U.S. citizens in the blockades, and the impact of foreign money to fund this illegal activity. President Biden and I both agree that for the security of people and the economy, these blockades cannot continue. So make no mistake, the border cannot and will not remain closed.
Prime Minister Trudeau is under mounting pressure to get the situation under control, with Washington calling on its northern neighbor to U.S. to use federal powers to end the blockades. Canada's self-styled Freedom Convoy began last month in the country's west, launched in anger at requirements that truckers either be vaccinated or test and isolate when crossing the U.S.-Canada border. A Canadian judge granted an injunction ordering the protesters, estimated to number a few hundred, along with several dozen trucks, to leave the bridge by 7 p.m. local time, according to Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkins. But as the deadline passed, more protesters joined in to block the suspension bridge. Meanwhile, the Premier of Ontario Province, the epicenter of the protests, announced a state of emergency, threatening steep fines of up to 100,000 Canadian dollars and jail unless protesters end their illegal occupation. Take a look.
Our economy in Ontario is built on trade, especially with our partners in the United States. The Ambassador Bridge in Windsor alone sees more than $700 million of two-way trade every single day. And that trade employs hundreds of thousands of Ontarians who work in auto plants and factories across our great province. Those jobs feed millions of families. To those who have chosen to take a city of 1 million people hostage for the past 2 weeks, to those who've attempted to disrupt our way of life by targeting our lifeline for food, fuel, and goods across our borders, to those trying to force a political agenda through disruption, intimidation, and chaos. My message to you is this: your right to make a political statement does not outweigh the right of hundreds of thousands of workers to earn their living. It does not outweigh our right to get food across our borders. Your right to make a political statement does not outweigh the rights of 1 million people in Ottawa to live peacefully, free of harassment and chaos in their own homes. So let me be as clear as I can. There will be consequences for these actions, and they will be severe. We've already started by going after the money funding the illegal occupation.
Meanwhile, the Ontario emergency came as a coalition of protesters, an estimated 1,800 vehicles, according to a police source, were closing in on Paris after setting off in convoy from across France. Defying police warnings, the French protesters included opponents of COVID vaccination, but also people angry at fast rising energy prices, in an echo of the yellow vest grievances that sparked widespread protests in 2018 and 2019. Take a look.
Nous serons fermes et nous empêcherons les blocages. La détermination des forces de sécurité intérieure est entière, le niveau de mobilisation est significatif et nous avons, par rapport à ce qui a pu se passer précédemment, je pense notamment au confinement, des dispositifs motorisés en nombre particulièrement important, dépanneuses, engins divers et véhicules blindés qui seront en capacité de mettre fin à tout blocage dans le cas extrême.
Armored vehicles have also been deployed in the streets of the capital for the first time since the Yellow Vest protests at the end of 2018, inspired by Canadian truckers paralyzing border traffic with the U.S. The demonstrators include anti-COVID vaccination activists, and also people angry at fast-rising energy prices. Hundreds of cars, motorhomes, and vans from Lille, Strasbourg, Cherbourg, and elsewhere stopped Friday evening at the gates of Paris, but a police source said no convoy had entered the capital. They're also demanding a withdrawal of the government's vaccine pass, which is required for access to many public spaces, and more help with their energy bills. Here in the country, the World Health Organization recognized and congratulated the Philippine government for being able to vaccinate at least 70% of its eligible population, but stressed the need to vaccinate the 2.5 million senior citizens that had not received a primary dose. Take a look.
So we congratulate the Philippine government for vaccinating over 60 million people so far. That is 70% of the eligible population over 12 years old. So that is really good. However, we also know that over 2.5 million senior citizens remain unvaccinated. They have not even received a single dose. So vaccinating older people is one of the most impactful ways to save lives during this pandemic. We know that senior citizens are at high risk of developing severe disease, getting hospitalized, and dying from COVID-19. With fewer restrictions and higher mobility happening now, we could be putting our unvaccinated senior citizens at risk of hospitalization and death. We appeal to the governors and mayors to do everything in their power to vaccinate our priority groups as soon as possible.
And the World Health Organization here in the Philippines also warned against the dangerous assumption that Omicron would bring the world to the pandemic endgame as new variants could still emerge. Again, let's listen in.
So we have a lot of uncertainties about the future evolution of this pandemic. It is very dangerous to assume that Omicron will be the last variant or that we are in the end game. New variants could emerge, and these new variants could even evade our countermeasures, may even become fully resistant to the current vaccines, which will necessitate vaccine adaptations. So although vaccine supplies have risen significantly everywhere, the African continent continues to struggle with vaccination rollout. As you may know, only 11% of the African population have completed full vaccination, which means less vaccination means more transmission there, and more transmission means we have high chances of new variants emerging there. But then this can cross over to any country. What happens in other countries affects the Philippines too, because we cannot virus-proof our international borders. So if other countries have low vaccination coverage and high transmission of the virus, yes, we expect that we could have new variants in the coming weeks or months. Let's hope that that doesn't happen, but let's be prepared for the worst.
Meanwhile, the CDC reported that a study found that the potency of third doses of Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines wanes substantially by the fourth month after administration. Speaking at a White House COVID briefing on Wednesday, President Joe Biden's top medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, said it was likely that fourth doses would more likely be needed for subsets of people who mount weaker immune responses, such as the elderly and the immunocompromised. Take a look.
For example, there may be the need for yet again another boost, in this case, a fourth dose boost for an individual receiving the mRNA that could be based on age as well as underlying conditions. So I don't think you're going to be hearing, if you do, any kind of recommendations that would be across the board for everyone. It very likely will take into account what subset of people have a diminished or not protection against the important parameters such as hospitalization.
During the Omicron predominant period, vaccine efficacy against COVID-associated emergency department or urgent care visits was 87% during the 2 months after a third dose, but fell to 66% by the fourth month. Vaccine efficacy against hospitalization was 91% in the first 2 months, but fell to 78% by the fourth month after a third dose. The authors concluded that the results of the study reinforces the importance of further consideration of additional doses to sustain or improve protection. Meanwhile, China on Saturday said it had given conditional approval for Pfizer's COVID drug Paxlovid to treat adults with mild to moderate illness and a high risk of developing severe disease. The drug has so far been authorized in about 40 countries, including the United States and Israel, while the European Union has permitted member states to use it ahead of formal approval as an emergency measure against rapidly spreading Omicron variant. Unlike COVID-19 vaccines, Pfizer says that preliminary studies show that Paxlovid does not target the ever-evolving spike protein the coronavirus uses to invade cells, meaning it should theoretically be more variant-proof. Beijing has not yet approved any foreign-made coronavirus vaccines. And Norway on Saturday lifted its final COVID restrictions, scrapping social distancing and masks in crowded spaces, despite a surge in Omicron infections. Norway lifted most of its other COVID curbs earlier this month, including remote working and crowd size limits. The requirement to isolate for 4 days after a positive COVID test was meanwhile Saturday downgraded to a recommendation, and children with respiratory symptoms are no longer required to get tested for COVID. The Norwegian Institute of Public Health, or FHI, said the country had yet to see the peak of the Omicron surge, but it was expected soon. FHI estimates that 3 to 4 million people from a population of 5.4 million may be infected this summer. And New York joined a wave of Democrat-run U.S. states to roll back mask mandates. Here's Melanor Tanhueco from our New York bureau.
New York's statewide indoor business mask or vaccine requirement was lifted on Thursday. This emergency temporary measure was put in place 2 months ago to fight the spread of the Omicron variant. Statewide, COVID cases are down 93% since the peak on January 7th, with cases and hospitalizations declining. Governor Hochul consulted with experts and local leaders to determine the next steps in facing the pandemic.
And at this time, we say that it's the right decision to lift this mandate for indoor businesses and let counties, cities, and businesses to make their own decisions on what they want to do with respect to mask or the vaccination requirement.
The mask requirement will remain in place in certain high-density areas. This includes state-regulated healthcare settings, nursing homes, correctional facilities, schools and childcare centers, homeless shelters, bus and subway stations, and planes and airports. The mask requirement in schools will be assessed in early March. Governor Hochul announced a new winter toolkit to help keep New Yorkers safe. It focuses on 5 core areas: protecting the most vulnerable New Yorkers, increasing vaccinations and boosters, strengthening our healthcare system, empowering local leaders, and supporting individuals facing the long-term effects of COVID. As the state loosens restrictions, the governor is still reminding New Yorkers to remain vigilant and to get vaccinated. Melanor Tanhueco, Eagle News, Rochester, New York.
And staying in New York, the city was poised to sack roughly 3,000 municipal workers for failing to meet a deadline to get vaccinated against COVID-19. The expected dismissals come amid growing discontent in North America against restrictions and as states unilaterally lift mask mandates. Again, let's listen in.
We're going to do it. Remember, we're right-sizing government. Remember, I stated that from the beginning. That's why we're doing the 3% peg. We're going to right-size government. Those areas that we need to replace, we are going to replace. We're going to do a real assessment to make sure taxpayers are getting their money's worth. And so those who determine that they don't want to go with the obligation that is required, there was a temporary restraining order that was filed. The courts rule on our behalf, and so this is the law of the land. People must follow it, and hopefully people will just listen to what we're saying, hear my voice, and just get vaccinated, protect their families.
Well, I'm a New York City firefighter. I've been so for 16 years, and as of today, I'm on the list to be terminated. So the last 16 years of the investment I've made into the city and into serving the populace of the city is basically being removed. I'm going to lose my livelihood. I may very well lose my house. And these are conditions by which I cannot stand by, not only for myself, for any other human being in this city and, in fact, in this country.
But from what I understand, if I'm not vaccinated by 5 o'clock today, I lose my job. I was given.
Today, there are city workers that are, they've been told they're going to be terminated if they do not show proof of vaccination for COVID-19. It's a hard day for many people because if even one person becomes terminated due to protecting their choice to medical freedom, it's just a bad day for this city and America as a whole.
All city employees. New York requires all city employees, including police, firefighters, and teachers, to receive at least one dose of a vaccine under orders passed by former Mayor Bill de Blasio last year. Like mandatory mask wearing, mandatory vaccinations have been a controversial political issue in America, with Republican-led Texas going as far as banning them. Hundreds of workers who oppose New York's vaccine requirement marched to the City Hall in Manhattan. Meanwhile, Japanese authorities are struggling to curb a spike in COVID infections. The government said it will extend its quasi-emergency measures. Here's Dennis Liu for the details.
The government is considering extending its COVID-19 quasi-emergency designation for Tokyo and 12 other prefectures for about 3 weeks. Officials think that an extension of the designation is needed because of a surge in new COVID-19 cases. In Tokyo, 12,211 new cases were confirmed on Monday, the highest for any Monday in the capital. On Tuesday, the metropolitan government started accepting applications for the kits so that close contacts staying at home can test themselves if they develop symptoms. The kits will be delivered directly to the homes of close contacts. Applications for the kits will be accepted until February 27th. The metropolitan government can accept applications for up to 40,000 kits per day. The spread of the Omicron variant has sharply boosted the number of infected people and close contacts. The health ministry also said the government will provide financial support to help local governments arrange substitute facilities to look after children in their nurseries closed due to coronavirus infections. Given the recent spread of the Omicron variant at nurseries, the ministry has also temporarily recommended that nursery school children wear face masks when possible, but it's not recommended for those under 2 years old. On the medical front, the government will increase subsidies for medical institutes that dispatch nurses to elderly facilities so that residents at such facilities will be able to receive treatment there. It will also strengthen the emergency medical system and facilitate the transfer of COVID-19 patients who were hospitalized but later recovered to local medical institutes without hospital beds specifically allocated to COVID-19 patients. The government will also facilitate giving booster shots to nursery staff as well as those in elderly facilities. New cases exceeded 100,000 a day nationwide for the first time last week, but only 5.9% of Japan's population of 125 million, or about 7.47 million people, have received a third shot since the beginning of December as of Monday, according to the government. This is the latest for now. Reporting from Tokyo, Japan, this is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, fears of a new lockdown sparked panic buying in Hong Kong, with the city determined to maintain China's strict zero-COVID policy. Here is Kit Wong for the details.
Shoppers found Hong Kong's markets feeling a shortage of food, familiar scenes in a city that is back under growing restrictions in contrast to much of the world.
On Tuesday, the city recorded 625 new infections, a daily record but a number that pales in comparison with outbreaks around the world. The Omicron variant spike has alarmed authorities, and leader Carrie Lam announced renewed curbs. In scenes reminiscent of early 2020, when the coronavirus first emerged in China, Hong Kongers this week scrambled to stock up as panic set in over food supply stocks. This week, a cross-border truck driver tested positive for COVID, spurring a temporary hold-up of delivery trucks. The government said Hong Kong's vegetable supply has since decreased by about a third. City leader Carrie Lam announced that meetings in homes of more than 2 families were forbidden. She has ordered religious sites and hair salons to close by Thursday, sending Hong Kongers rushing to barbers for a last-minute trim. Meanwhile, yesterday, the Stay Home Safe Scheme was launched. Under this scheme, COVID-19 patients, close contacts, and household members of those close contacts who are deemed appropriate after assessment will be arranged to undergo home quarantine for 14 days and 4 days, respectively. The Center for Health Protection explained that factors including the suitability of each individual's dwelling place for quarantine, the risk level of those confining at the same place and their physical condition will be taken into consideration during the assessment.
而家喺599G 第599G 嘅規例咧，喺公眾地方嘅群組聚會人數上限係4人。今日嘅修訂咧係收緊到2人。我哋會加入禁止2個家庭以上喺私人地方進行跨家庭嘅聚會。今年嘅2月24日開始，所有嘅人士進入去受限嘅處所咧，係需要使用安心出行，而且咧係要提供疫苗個接種記錄。除咗用法律嘅規定嚟到去使用呢個疫苗通行證咧，政府亦都會以行政手段喺其他嘅處所引入使用疫苗嘅通行證。呢啲包括係學校啦、大學啦。所有接受社會接受政府資助嘅。I hope we all realize that the time has come for Hong Kong to take some tough measures. And every measure that we now introduce has been undertaken in another jurisdiction, including some places and countries which are very proud of their human rights, their democracy, and so on. They are doing all these sort of things because this is about life. Public health prevails very often, the individual freedoms. But we will not make any individual in Hong Kong who simply could not live. So there will be exemptions, there will be compassionate treatment for this and that.
Those who need to undergo home quarantine must stay in their dwelling place and wear an electronic wristband throughout the quarantine period. From Hong Kong, reporting for Eagle News, this is Kip Wong, and we live in interesting times.
Madagascar's death toll from tropical cyclone Batsirai rose to 120, with most of the fatalities from a single district where it leveled homes. Take a look. The National Disaster Management Agency, BNGRC, said the majority had died in a Congo district near the east coast of the Indian Ocean island. About 125,000 people have been affected after Batsirai struck last weekend, according to the agency in an updated fact sheet. Aid agencies are worried about ensuring clean drinking water, and they've begun setting up purification systems. Waterborne diseases pose a major health risk after tropical storms, and Madagascar is one of the poorest countries in the world. Some 42% of children suffer from chronic malnutrition even without a natural disaster. And NASCAR made its sports history, holding its season-opening exhibition race for the first time in the iconic Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Our EBC Los Angeles team with a story.
Welcome to the Clash at the Coliseum. Woo!
Here we are at the Clash at the LA Coliseum. Let's go NASCAR!
For the first time in NASCAR history, the preseason clash takes place at the iconic Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum.
And for those going to a NASCAR race in person for the first time, one of the things they'll discover is that the engines are so loud, no matter how you sing at the top of your lungs, no one will be able to hear you. Observe. A quarter-mile lap, or short track, was built in the Coliseum, which makes for a dynamically frenzied, tight-turning race.
And out of a field of 23 racers, it was Joey Logano driving the number 22 Team Penske Ford who, after taking the checkered flag, treated NASCAR fans to a celebratory burnout. Before marching up the steps from victory lane to solidify his moment in history.
Preceding the race, we spoke with ticket holders at NASCAR's fan event who were more than happy to express their passion for the sport.
We're huge NASCAR fans. We were born and raised watching NASCAR. Our dad loves NASCAR. We actually bought him tickets to this race for his birthday.
And this is actually our first NASCAR race.
Yeah, that we're attending.
I've been a NASCAR fan most of my life. I watch more F1, but NASCAR's never been to LA, so this is a big deal.
This is my first time, so I don't really know what to expect, but I'm really excited. It sounds really cool and everything looks amazing set up.
I've been a fan for maybe the last 5 years, it was introduced to me. So I'm a Kyle Busch fan, go Kyle, that's what I'm most excited to see.
I got into NASCAR a while back. I stopped watching it because, I hadn't had the stuff to watch it live. So this time I'm going to a live event, so I'm very stoked to see that.
I expect to see some cool things. I mean, tight turns, pretty short track, quarter mile. It's pretty awesome. It's gonna be sick. I mean, it's really fast cars just turning left. So I mean, what can't you like about that?
To be honest, I've never seen a live short track race. I've only seen the large one in Fontana. The smaller tracks should be more interesting, a lot tighter races, a lot more bumping and rubbing and getting things a little more intense.
One topic, almost as important as the race itself, was a discussion about making LA City proper a permanent venue for NASCAR.
I think it's a really cool experience with having it so close and having so much history here. It's just really awesome to see it here.
It's fun. It's fun. He was actually talking about coming to LA and he didn't realize we were in LA today. So once he got here and realized what it was awesome. And it's not far from home. It's only 30 minutes. It was great, easy drive. So if this happens more often, hopefully it will, and we'll be back for the next one.
Please, continue. There's fans here. There are fans here in California, and we want to see more.
I would love if they brought it back here more often because it's an easy drive from Phoenix, so we could come back here anytime it's in LA again.
I think there's as many car people out here as there are on that side of the U.S. So NASCAR, keep doing this. Look around, there's a lot of people.
We go straight to the source to pose the question, could sizable attendance and fan satisfaction ensure future NASCAR races in LA?
Alan Basoyahe, Eagle Broadcasting. The pandemic restrictions in Los Angeles is a little more elevated than in other cities. How did that factor in logistically? And the turnout, though, we're going to assume you're still pretty satisfied with.
I would say logistically, we were pretty well schooled in different states, different counties, where you had to go due to COVID, from no fans to partial fans. So, part of this was making sure we're in lockstep with what the rules were going to be. I think our team, Tom Bryan and the whole crew, did a tremendous job working hand in hand with all the local authorities to make sure that we were there. And back to your crowd question, the crowd met every expectation we had going in. So when you look at the naysayers prior to, when you look at where we were with the Clash in Daytona, it's a home run. And I think the enthusiasm, the demographic, a lot of young people out there having fun is exactly what we want.
While the clash at the Coliseum doesn't count towards standings for the season, drivers battle fiercely. Because let's face it, who wants to lose?
With live performances, pre-race activities, and adrenaline-fueled driving, well, no one did. Lose, that is.
Evan Allen, Eagle News, Los Angeles. Thanks, Evan Allen. And we'll go for a short break, and we'll be right back.
kaagapay. Naku, sorry, hindi ko kayo napansin, ha? Kasi sobrang intense nitong nilalaro ko. Dahil sa gaming pala, hindi lang intense ang laban, grabe din ang kitaan. Talagang ulan ang kabuhayan.
Nauli si Edward pero sinasabi dito ng Blacklist International, huwag nyo nang sabihin na mausang comeback. This is Kyrie!
Ang tagal kasi niyan, nahuli yung Eve doon. Patay.
Ako po si Mariel Rodriguez Padilla at ito po ang Unlad, Kaagapay sa Hanap Buhay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. Starlight, Starbright, the James Webb Space Telescope has seen its first star, though it wasn't quite tonight, and even taken a selfie that was announced by NASA on Friday. The steps are part of the months-long process of aligning the observatory's enormous golden mirror that astronomers hope will begin unraveling the mysteries of the early universe by this summer. The first picture sent back of the cosmos is far from stunning. 18 blurry white dots on a black background, all showing the same object, HD 84406, a bright isolated star in the constellation Ursa Major. But in fact, it represents a major milestone. The 18 dots were captured by the primary mirror's 18 individual segments. And the image is now the basis for aligning and focusing those hexagonal pieces. The light bounced off the segments to Webb's secondary mirror, a round object located at the end of long booms, and then to the near-infrared camera or NIRCam instrument, Webb's main imaging device. To aid the process, the team also captured a selfie taken not through an externally mounted camera, but through a special lens on board NIRCam. NASA had previously said a selfie wasn't possible, so the news comes as a welcome bonus for space fans. And as always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times. Good night.